We are here in the place that's called Armageddon. It's written in the New Testament. The place is very important for the Christian.
Beneath centuries of mud, a forgotten church has whispered its secrets for 1,500 years. Inside, a mosaic hints at words Jesus may have spoken to Peter, words never written in any gospel. This discovery is reshaping what we know about the early apostles and the faith they built. Join us as we uncover this new discovery and why it matters to the world. The Byzantine secret. For a very long time, many people thought every message Jesus ever shared was already known to the world. But on the quiet northern edge of the Sea of Galilee, a team of archaeologists made a discovery that gently shook that old belief. They uncovered the ruins of an ancient Byzantine church, a place built many centuries after Jesus lived, and its remains stretched across a space about the size of 1.5 dunams. Hidden under layers of soil that had slept there for roughly 1,500 years, they found pieces of a story that seemed to point back to something Jesus might have once shared privately with Peter, something not written in any gospel. The search team explained that during the Byzantine period, a grand basilica had been raised on that very spot. All signs suggested it was dedicated to Peter, one of Jesus's closest followers, which made the location even more meaningful. Bit by bit, the group brushed away old mud and forgotten stones until they realized the church had been carefully sealed by time, almost as if the early Christian community wanted to protect the memory held within it. As they worked, they felt they were touching a moment that stretched across the ages. The early believers who built the church seemed to hold a deep respect for Peter and possibly wanted to honor something he once experienced. The site did not present a clear message carved in stone or a complete record of lost teachings, and experts noted that some claims around the find were still unconfirmed and built on guesswork. Yet the clues suggested that the community who worshipped there believed Peter carried a special message from Jesus, one important enough to preserve in a sacred place. The idea that a forgotten church might guard hints of a private conversation between Jesus and Peter stirred quiet excitement among historians. Some of the evidence was solid, like the age of the basilica and its dedication. Other ideas remained uncertain, shaped by ongoing study rather than firm proof. Even so, the discovery reminded everyone how the past can hold gentle surprises. What seemed lost for centuries could suddenly rise again, carried by bricks, stones, and the silent memories of early followers. In the end, the find did not rewrite Christian history in loud, dramatic strokes, but it encouraged fresh thinking about how early believers honored their leaders and treasured the words they believed were sacred. And on the peaceful shore of Galilee, the old ruins whispered that there may always be more to learn, more to uncover, and more stories waiting patiently beneath the earth. Truth hidden in the earth. On the quiet northern edge of the Sea of Galilee, close to the place where the Jordan River slips into the lake, a small group of archaeologists started a dig that would soon become one of their most memorable projects. At first, the spot looked hopeless. The shoreline felt abandoned, and the ground was covered with thick layers of mud left behind by many floods. Older surveys had walked away from this location, calling it too messy and too difficult to work with. But this team believed something important might be hiding under the silent surface. For years, local fishermen had talked about decorated stones that sometimes showed themselves when the water sank low. Those stories stayed in the archaeologists' minds, and they wondered what the lake had been keeping tucked away. Under the hot, summer sun, they pushed forward. The air held the smell of damp clay and salt, and every scrape of their tools echoed against the heavy earth. For a long stretch, they uncovered nothing more exciting than mud, snail shells, and chipped pieces of pottery. Then, on the fifth morning, a tool tapped against something smooth and strange. The sound felt different, softer and firmer than the usual stone. They widened the opening and brushed the soil away with their hands. Slowly, a row of tiny colored tiles peeked out from the silt. At first, the colors seemed washed out, but they brightened as the team rinsed them. Day by day, over the next 2 weeks, the group worked in careful squares, revealing more of the hidden structure. Bit by bit, the outline of something enormous appeared. Thick, ancient walls rose from the ground, corners shaped with skill, and at the eastern side, they uncovered a curved room often found in early Christian buildings. Their notes recorded that the structure covered roughly 1.5 dunums, large enough to hold several hundred worshippers. This was not a small gathering place. It was a grand Byzantine church built many centuries ago. When the conservation team gently washed the floor, the entire room seemed to awaken. The mosaic beneath was remarkably preserved, its colors bright, and its design so clear that it felt as if the artists had only just finished their work. Near the center of the mosaic, faint markings in Greek slowly appeared under the water. A language expert took time reading them, and when the meaning became fully clear, the team understood why this church mattered so deeply. The inscription honored Peter, describing him as the leading figure among the apostles and the one believed to hold the heavenly authority that early Christians linked to him. The discovery left the group standing in quiet wonder. They had not only uncovered a forgotten building, they had revealed a place built with devotion, a place where early believers gathered to remember a man they saw as a guiding light of their faith. This once hidden church, resting under centuries of mud, had finally told its story. For a short while, the group stood in complete silence. They all felt the weight of what they were seeing. The words beneath their feet were not just pretty designs. They had been placed at the center of the floor like a firm declaration, carefully arranged by hands that wanted them to last. The letters were sharp, the spaces between them still tidy, and the whole surface looked strangely well protected for something so old. Some members of the team whispered that the room might have been sealed on purpose long ago, as if someone had tried to guard it from harm. Others stayed cautious, reminding everyone that real conclusions would only come after proper study. Yet one thing no one argued about was the clear intention behind the mosaic. Whoever created it wanted the message to stand strong. When the day faded and the sky turned orange, the workers gently covered the mosaic to shield it from the night air. The Sea of Galilee glimmered softly nearby, almost as if it were watching with them. As they walked away, each person carried the same quiet realization. This was more than an old building. It felt like a doorway to a forgotten moment in history. Their field notes showed a single question rising again and again in their thoughts. What story did this floor belong to? And what kind of community had gathered around a church like this so many centuries ago? To find those answers, they knew they would have to search far back into the past, toward a place often mentioned in ancient writings, but somehow lost from modern maps, a town remembered in scripture yet missing in the world today. They kept digging because the soil kept giving hints. The team believed the floor belonged to a town long spoken about in the Gospels, Bethsaida, the place where Peter, Andrew, and Philip once lived, and where many early stories about Jesus began. For centuries, the town's name drifted away from maps. The lake's edge moved. Floods covered fields and roads. Over time, that busy little place was swallowed by mud and memory. After the 1st century, the name Bethsaida nearly disappeared from official lists. Pilgrims in the 4th century tried to find it by following stories, and later seekers in the 1800s used maps and shovels to look again. 2 spots rose as the main possibilities. One was a raised mound a bit inland, and the other was a low, water-swept plain close to the shore. Each place had some proof and some problems. One showed strong traces from very old times, but not much from the 1st century. The other had Roman items and hints of ancient floors, yet the water and floods made study difficult. Experts went back and forth for many years. Things began to change in 2016 when an international team returned to the flat site near the lake, with new tools and careful plans. They used soil tests and magnetic scans to look under the surface without digging everywhere. The instruments marked dense shapes under the ground that looked like walls and streets. When the archaeologists opened trenches, they found pottery, glass, and coins that could be dated to the 1st century. These finds suggested people lived there in the time when the Gospels say Bethsaida existed. As the dig continued, the team uncovered parts of a grand Byzantine church built above the older remains. Inside the church, mosaics and an inscription appeared. One mosaic included words that honored Peter, written in Greek. The inscription and the church's style helped explain why people in later centuries had called this place Bethsaida and had built there to remember the apostles. Still, the evidence did not end the argument. It made the site a very strong candidate, but some scholars warn that more study is needed before any final claim is made. In short, the work at the lakeshore has brought the story of Bethsaida back into view. Careful science has found layers from Roman times under a later church, coins and pottery from the right era, and an inscription that points to Peter. These discoveries do not yet settle every question, but they give real things to touch and study. They turn a long-lost name from a story into a place that can be dug, dated, and better understood. The conversation between scholars will go on, but the quiet mud at the edge of the Sea of Galilee now holds new answers and new questions for those who keep looking. As the work continued, the ground slowly revealed its secrets. Month after month, more shapes rose from the muddy soil, and the outlines of ancient homes began to take form. Some experts studying the layers believed they were looking at more than a quiet cluster of houses. The remains suggested a lively fishing community, the kind that would have stood beside the Sea of Galilee during the days of Jesus. Nets, boats, and families once filled this shoreline, and the traces left behind matched the world described in early writings. For the first time, the stories passed down through Scripture seemed to sit comfortably beside physical proof. The long-missing town of Bethsaida, once thought to have vanished forever, now felt closer than it had in centuries. What had been only a name whispered through history was slowly turning into a place that could be touched and measured, and the soil was not finished speaking. More than walls and streets were waiting beneath the surface. The land still held memories that had slept for generations, and each new layer promised to bring the team closer to understanding the community that once lived beside the water. Keep watching to discover this ancient community. Church of the Fishermen, the group kept digging, expecting only small pieces of an ordinary village. They imagined they might uncover a few broken stones, bits of pottery, or maybe part of an old pathway. Instead, something far larger began to unfold beneath the soil. Little clues slowly connected into a much bigger picture. A short wall stretched into a row of rooms. Round shapes in the dirt turned out to be the bases of tall columns that once held up a roof. By the third week, they reached a curved area on the eastern side of the structure. People trained in ancient architecture recognized it immediately as the place where an altar would have stood. That was the moment they knew they were not digging up a house or a storehouse. They were uncovering a full early Christian church from the Byzantine era, and its size took everyone by surprise. The floor plan spread wider than anything expected in a small village. The building was arranged carefully and built with real skill, as if it had welcomed many visitors long ago. When the conservation team washed the surface, the floor brightened. Mosaics made from tiny pieces of red, blue, and white. Stone filled the space with gentle patterns. The sunlight made the colors shine even more. This was clearly more than a little prayer spot for local families. According to some experts, it looked like a place designed to welcome travelers and worshippers passing through the region. As they lifted more earth, they reached layers older than the church itself. These deeper levels held signs of life from the 1st century. There were fishing hooks, weights for nets, and simple pottery used for daily cooking. These small items matched what people in a fishing town would have needed. The evidence suggested a living community had settled here long before anyone built a church above it. It seemed the early Christians chose this exact patch of ground for a reason, not by accident. Old writings helped the group connect the pieces. An 8th century traveler named Willibald once described a church by the Sea of Galilee built in the place where Peter and Andrew had lived. Many historians dismissed that account for years, believing it sounded more like a tradition than a fact. But here, at the site called El Araj, the pieces matched much of what he described. There were guest rooms for visitors, parts of a bathhouse, and a large open yard where people could gather. According to the team's reports, this was the first time the written memory and the evidence under the ground fit together so closely. It felt as if they were reading history, layer by layer. First came a Roman period fishing village. Then, centuries later, a Christian community built a shrine over the same land. That choice made sense. Early Christians often placed churches on sites they believed were connected to the apostles. Some archaeologists thought this building was meant to honor those memories. Others stayed cautious, saying more proof was needed. Still, everyone agreed that the placement of this church was intentional. Yet one question still hovered over the site. Why had this exact spot been chosen with such care? The team sensed that the answer lay just below them, waiting patiently in the center of the floor, carved into stone and preserved by time. The speaking stone. The stone panel lay in the very center of the main hall, the part of the church where people once gathered close together to pray. This wide space, known as the nave, opened before them like a quiet stage. A circle of bright tiles framed a flat block of text set into the floor. The conservators worked with slow, careful strokes, brushing away dirt until the letters began to shine again. The whole team formed a gentle curve behind the specialist, who read the Greek words clearly as they appeared. At first, the message followed a familiar pattern. It mentioned a man named Constantine, described as a devoted follower of Christ. This kind of dedication was common in churches from that time. But then, the line shifted. It honored Peter in a way that everyone recognized, calling him the leading apostle and keeper of the keys. That part felt expected. It echoed a well-known teaching from early Christian tradition. What stopped the room was the final phrase. It spoke of keys belonging to heavenly spheres. The wording felt unusual. The experts on ancient writing pointed out that these terms did not appear in any known biblical text. The language team said the phrase echoed very old beliefs, ones that pictured heaven in layers or levels. A few scholars suggested that the words might reflect something first spoken in Aramaic and later shaped into Greek through local preaching. They stressed this was only a theory, not a proven fact. Everyone studied the letters closely. The carving looked precise and confident. Every line was even, every angle clean. No one saw signs of corrections or rushed work. The notes in the field diary said the lettering was so sharp that the floor must have been protected early in its life, which explained why it still looked almost new. Some reminded the group that laboratory testing would be needed to confirm how long the mosaic stayed visible before being sealed. The true meaning of the words was the difficult part. If they preserved a local saying, then the mosaic might hold an echo of teaching that never made its way into the written Gospels. This idea made some team members excited and made others uneasy. A few quietly admitted it could stir disagreement far beyond the site. The directors chose their words with great care in later briefings. They explained that the inscription added to known lines, but they did not claim it changed anything in Scripture. Even so, the discovery shifted the importance of the whole site. What had once seemed like an impressive church was suddenly at the center of deep discussions about Peter's role and how early Christians remembered the things Jesus said. The text did not feel ornamental, it felt intentional, like a message placed there for future eyes. To understand why the builders would embed such wording in the heart of the hall, the researchers looked to the world of early believers. These communities had no printed guides or fixed maps. They relied on memories handed down through families, travelers, and local groups. They built sanctuaries on land where people believed sacred events had taken place. This was not guesswork. It was a way to keep precious moments alive in stone and space. Across the Holy Land, these choices shaped the landscape of faith. A church in Bethlehem rose over a cave, remembered as the place where Christ was born. Another in Jerusalem stood over the hill believed to be the site of his death and burial. In Nazareth, a sanctuary honored the moment when Mary received her calling. None of these places were chosen randomly. They were chosen by people who still carried living stories. The church at El Araj seemed to follow the same pattern. Its builders selected ground already marked by older memories. They added rooms for guests, a space for baptisms, and a large hall for worship, all features of pilgrimage centers that welcomed travelers seeking comfort or healing. Every detail suggested remembrance, not invention. These builders were preserving something they believed had happened on that soil. Some archaeologists thought this site held a spoken memory linked to the ministry of Jesus. In that view, the basilica stood as a physical reminder of important words once spoken there. Peter was not only honored as a leader, he was remembered as the guardian of a promise. The mosaic that named him chief among the apostles might have held deeper meaning than simple respect. Not all scholars agreed, and many urged caution. Without written proof from the early centuries, no one could say with certainty what the builders were preserving. Even so, most agreed that the combination of the church's location, style, and inscription pointed to intentional memory-keeping rather than creative storytelling. Then, during the final stages of cleaning, something unexpected appeared. The conservators began their usual checks, taking photographs and scanning the floor with special equipment. Under the dim wash of infrared imaging, a faint ring of text around the main inscription began to separate from the stone. It had been nearly invisible in normal light. The room grew very quiet as the specialists traced the faded letters and pieced the line together. The writing was damaged in places, but enough remained for experts to rebuild the sentence with reasonable confidence. The phrasing did not match any known scripture. It felt personal, almost like a spoken message handed from one voice to another. Translators noted that the pattern of the line resembled the flow of early Aramaic speech. Some scholars suggested that it might preserve a local memory that was later translated into Greek for the Mosaic, though they were careful to say this was only a possibility. The structure of the sentence drew immediate attention. It paired two ideas in a way that echoed earlier traditions about Peter's responsibility on earth and Christ's work in heaven. If the reconstruction was right, then one part of the line pointed toward Peter's care for the community of believers. The other part suggested Christ preparing the realms above. Together, the ideas painted a picture of shared work between the earthly and the divine. The emotional weight hit the team all at once. Some felt stunned. Others felt anxious about how such a discovery might be received. Reports said the directors described the wording only as an early local tradition that expanded a familiar promise. They avoided calling it new scripture or claiming any final meaning. Even with this caution, the implications were strong. If the line truly reflected a memory kept among early followers in Galilee, then this mosaic could be the first physical object to hold a direct saying connected to Jesus' words to Peter. In this interpretation, Peter became more than a doorkeeper. He became the guardian of a household of faith, while Christ completed the unseen work above. The team carefully sealed the mosaic again to protect it and sent images to outside experts for further study. The news moved quickly. Within days, scholars, teachers, and church leaders began discussing what the discovery could mean. Across seminaries and gatherings, debates reopened about Peter's role in early Christianity and how the first believers preserved their memories. The ancient floor, once quiet for centuries, now stirred conversations far beyond the shores of the Sea of Galilee. St. Peter and the Keys. For 2,000 years, people have tried to understand what Peter's place in the Christian story really meant, and the question never stopped stirring hearts. Some saw him as the steady rock that held the early church together. Others pictured him as a gentle guide, walking beside the other disciples, not above them. His keys became the symbol everyone argued about, a tiny object carrying a huge echo across history. And as time moved on, those small differences grew into wide, unbreakable lines that shaped the map of the Christian world. In the West, Peter slowly became the face of leadership, the beginning of a chain that reached all the way to the papacy. In the East, believers held him close in a quieter way, seeing him as the first friend in a circle of equals. Later, when the reformers arrived, they read the old verse again with new eyes. They said the keys were not a badge for one man at all, but a sign that every believer had a place in the story. Still, none of those voices could silence what the stones of Galilee whispered after being asleep for centuries. The mosaic at El Araj was not ordered by rulers or carved to impress kings. It was placed by ordinary hands that carried memories older than any council or quarrel. Long before church walls split and arguments hardened, those early builders honored Peter exactly as the ancient stories described him. They remembered him as the first to step forward, the man trusted with something precious, the keeper of a promise given beside the waters where their faith was born. Early translators said the wording felt strangely gentle and strangely vast at the same time, as if it linked earth and heaven in one breath. It showed Peter not as a man reaching for power, but as someone asked to watch over a family of believers while Christ shaped the worlds above. Even scholars who doubted every unusual detail admitted that the mosaic could no longer be dismissed. It was not a rumor, it was not a late invention. It was real, old, and carved into the very place where the story first unfolded. The discovery created a quiet pause in many hearts. The church at El Araj had not tried to teach a grand lesson. It had simply saved a memory, holding it safe through centuries of dust and silence. And in that memory, Peter seemed to return to the shoreline where his journey began. Now the question is softer, but deeper. Were these words meant to shake the beliefs of the world, or simply guide them back to their beginning? Maybe, like all ancient mysteries, the meaning waits in the hands of the one who reads it. Stay tuned to see how researchers react to this missing link. How the world reacted. As months passed, specialists across different fields offered small pieces to the puzzle. Geologists studied the stone's wear. Historians traced the traditions of local villages. Linguists searched for echoes of the unusual phrasing in old prayer songs and fading oral tales. Nothing provided a firm answer, but each clue curved gently toward the same idea. The community at El Araj cherished something they believed had happened on that ground. They poured their memory into the floor not to start a debate, but to protect the moment they thought tied heaven and earth together. Believers who visited the site later spoke about a strange mix of peace and weight when they stood in the nave. The hall was small compared to famous basilicas, but it carried a soft dignity, like a place that still remembered who once walked there. Even those who doubted the inscription felt the story's pull. Something about the mosaic's quiet confidence nudged them to wonder what early faith sounded like before centuries of arguments pressed down on it. Soon, museums asked for casts of the inscription, and universities planned long studies. But the directors of the dig insisted that the real treasure was not the stone itself. It was the reminder that history is alive, always waiting to surprise those who think everything important has already been found. The El Araj mosaic did not rewrite scripture. It did not solve every debate. Instead, it offered a window into the thoughts of the earliest believers, a small but steady glimpse of how they saw Peter, Christ, and the fragile link between their world and the world above. And so the story settled into a gentle end. The church remained buried under protective layers, resting again, the way old places like to rest. Scholars continued to argue, and believers continued to wonder. But the mosaic's voice lingered. It spoke softly from the past, reminding anyone who listened that the beginnings of faith are always deeper, older, and more mysterious than they appear. It reminded them that sometimes the smallest lines of stone can carry the biggest echoes, and for many, that quiet echo was enough. Outro now. What do you think about the recent discovery? Let's hear from you in the comments. Remember to hit the like button and subscribe. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.